In this video, I will be introducing Asperger Syndrome. It is a high-functioning form of autism that is poorly understood. I just happen to have it. Asperger Syndrome, which is often abbreviated AS, is a sociological disorder classified as a very unique and misunderstood syndrome in the autism spectrum, which defines all disorders and syndromes related to autism. In the past, people with this syndrome were thought of as having a schizoid personality, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or autistic psychopathy, and it was found out later that none of those were the case. Being misdiagnosed is quite common due to the rareness of the syndrome. The Viennese psychologist and pediatrician Hans Asperger, whose area of expertise was emotional and learning problems in children, first diagnosed this syndrome in 1944, and it was later named after him. However, it had not been diagnosed in North America until the 1980s because Asperger's work was not translated to English until the 1970s. Asperger syndrome is often called pervasive development disorder, or PDD. Autism spectrum disorders, such as Asperger syndrome, occurs in 1 out of 650 to 1,000 persons. More specifically, Asperger syndrome occurs in 1 in 10,000 people. Asperger syndrome is up to 10 times more common in males than in females. Although it has often been considered to be a disorder, it would be better to describe it as a personality style because of the fact that those of us who have it tend to be social loners. It is best to compare Asperger syndrome with autism in order to gain an understanding about it because they are both sociological disorders and autism is better known. Unlike autism, we rarely have any cases of mental retardation and are better able to adapt to society. One similarity it has to autism is the genetic factor, although we are less severely affected. We often would have a parent or other relative with a related disorder, such as PDD, ADD, or autism. It is difficult for people to tell the difference between a young child who is autistic and a young child who has Asperger syndrome, but the differences are more apparent as the child gets older. Diagnoses are established 10 or more years later for us than those with autism. There are more differences than similarities between the two prognoses. The characteristics of this syndrome include poor choice of words when speaking, motor clumsiness, nonverbal communication, and social interaction, which is the most noticeable difficulty. In other words, we often have impairments in face-to-face communication and two-way interaction with other people. The impairments in social interaction work strongly against us. As children in school, especially in physical education classes, we are unfortunately targets of bullying because many of the other students mistake us as being mentally retarded, which is definitely false. The students that end up as bullies pick on the person with Asperger syndrome just because he or she is different. Also, we often have trouble making friends at school because of sociological necessities, which are often mandatory in order to function adequately with peers and in society. For example, getting a date is nearly impossible for a teenager with Asperger syndrome. Teachers also misunderstand the syndrome, but not as badly as do the students. During the preteen years of life, we become more aware that we are different from others. Adults with the syndrome are more capable of living on their own than autistic adults. An interesting and positive trait that we have is that we develop unique interests and become highly intelligent, especially in our main areas of interest. Interests may include topics in astronomy, classification of plants and animals, memorization of train schedules, and other obscure but intriguing topics. These interests would often change every few years or so. Often we may gain knowledge in a subject we are not particularly interested in, such as geography. There is usually a primary interest, which is what is focused on above all, plus several secondary interests that are studied by us, but not as focused on as the primary interest. Topics admired by us are usually learned from books, computers, encyclopedias, and other media sources, rather than from personal communication with teachers and peers, etc. For example, we may know where Indonesia is, not because anyone told us, but because we saw on a map of Asia. There are, however, problems when we talk to other people about our topic when the other other people are not slightest bit interested. When having a conversation with us, it takes a rather short time for the conversation to lead to our topic of interest. This is another way we have difficulties in society. However, Asperger syndrome can help those of us who have it to accomplish many important things that apply to our interest, which is a positive benefit of the syndrome. Primary interests and sometimes secondary interests are always taken seriously by us. However, when others assume that our life revolves around our topic of interest, it gets tiresome and we tend to gradually prefer not to talk about our interest. We tend to do rather well in jobs that pertain to our area of interest, jobs that work in an organized routines, and jobs that do not have much social interaction. Solitary work, such as computer-related work, would be a good choice for a job. In my case, I stock the pets department at Walmart with no assistants, along with